Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 16th edition of Coffee with Ashish. And today we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Rajeev Kumar ji from Mystifly. And before we get into conversation with him, I just wanted to share the joy with everyone in terms of we are sort of, although in a limited way, but we are back to flying again, and which is also a very key component of today's discussion because we all know about Mystifly. It's a household name, and we're going to talk about air distribution and air trends. And I was told and I was reading that almost 100 crores worth of transaction on air was booked between Thursday to Saturday night when government allowed booking of tickets. So that was the amount of the intent build up. People really wanted to travel, and although a very limited number could travel on Monday among a lot of restrictions, but one can always imagine, and including myself, everybody's almost itching to travel again, and flights are going to be the first opportunity they get at hand to consume travel. And as always, I have a small cartoon to share with you and share that emotion. You can actually see on the left a lot of people used to do those virtual escalators and trying to capture an image to reminiscence the joy of flying. That's how frequent travelers are really missing air travel. And on the right, you can see some of the complications around compliance which are going to come up with people queuing up for almost 2 to 3 hours to get through security, and then they are even going to be checked before they board into the flight. So these things are going to become a bottleneck, but I think travel enthusiasts are not going to stop at that, and it's only going to make them come out stronger and going to consume travel in a much more passionate way. So I think good times are going to come soon, and who better to talk about air distribution and future trends around what's going to happen in air travel going forward than Rajeev, who's got more than 20 years of experience, and he co-founded Mystifly back in 2009. And Rajeev comes with a host of experience, not necessarily in the Indian market, but he has also got exposure in European markets, in the US market. So he understands the global business trends extremely well. And Mystifly has gone on to win under his leadership the title of world's leading airline consolidator for 5 times in a row now. And under his leadership, the business has scaled from a small customer base to now over 80 plus countries. It's actually Mystifly claims to be world's leading global airfare marketplace. They've got more than 500 airlines onto the platform, more than 183 LCCs, just to segment it. And if you see their B2B SaaS model, it is extremely competitive and exemplary in terms of what they've done on a niche. And it's a perfect example of what Ashish and I keep talking to a lot of startups, and they all start up with a vision, and then they say, okay, let me also try to do B2B, B2C, little bit of holiday business. And here is a perfect example of what focus can do if you are really focused on one segment of the travel industry and you do well to scale it up. There is ample opportunity, ample money to be made, ample scale up opportunities are available. And Mystifly, a platform, it doesn't only allow ticket, but it also does ancillary services, sales. It also does multi-currency B2B payment and settlements in the respective currency of the customer, and essentially offers an end-to-end platform for the B2B market. It also Mystifly last year also announced the launch of 1.C2, which was industry's first API tailored to elevating the air travel experience. And they have also recently, couple of months back, I was reading that they've also come up with new generation airline retailing and shopping API platform, which they're calling Airline Shopping and Retailing Hub ASR 1.0. And I think it's going to be completely amazing to hear from Rajeev some of those initiatives which he's carrying on technology front, which we haven't seen across. And I think I'll also, on a personal front, love to hear some opportunities from Rajeev around how he's managing the business in the COVID era. Because I was reading one of your blogs, Rajeev, and you also mentioned that the company was never ready to work in a remote environment, and that was a new learning for the company, that how do you improve your productivity and how do you work as an organization seamlessly even when you are working in such an unprecedented situation. So I think it's really amazing, and I admire that about you as a leader, that you have been vulnerable enough to share that with everybody, that's a learning. And I think that's what we all need to learn from you. So with that, a very warm welcome to you, Rajeev, on our show. We are really pleased to have you with us, and I'm personally hoping to learn a lot from this session. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Ashish to have a conversation with you while I sit back and enjoy my coffee.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. How's your coffee, Rajeev?
Fantastic.
You're doing
Thank you.
great. All right. So, I'm going to actually ask, although Karthik has said a few things, but I'm actually going to ask you to explain your business model to our viewers who may have logged in, number one. And number two, of course, within the same question is that how does it get tweaked to post-COVID era? But before I do that, I have a preamble to the question. I've known you since you did your stint with Kale Consultants, right? And what made you leave Kale? And you've been an entrepreneur and you've been a visionary in a model which was created out of the air, if I may say so, literally speaking and figuratively speaking. So how did you think of dropping this cushy job and you thought that's the model which could be created? And then, of course, flow into your model and whatever else.
So sure. No, I haven't worked for Kale. I think that's possibly not a right information. Right. But I mean, I recollect meeting you sometime in 2004, part of a consulting assignment, but that wasn't at Kale. It was for a company that I worked for. We were in the CRM space.
Right.
And
all right.
my memories of you go back to a very, very plush office. I mean, one of the plushest office that I've ever seen in my life, and I don't think I can ever see one of that stature.
Oh, wow.
Was a travel house. Yeah. I was literally like I mean, I had never seen something like that. I couldn't believe an office could be this plush. So
yes, so good work.
Yeah, and from there, of course, working for a consulting business in the technology space, then working for a travel tech business for a few months. Ended up deciding that the calling was to be an entrepreneur and to solve some of possibly not in the travel space. The early thoughts were more on the energy management side and so on. But eventually, I think destiny had to be that it had to be travel. And sometime in 2009, after another failed business that I had in the form of a call center business that I had created for the travel space,
right.
Is where Mystifly was born. And yeah, from there on, it's been about 10 years of journey. One of the core reasons that where Mystifly emerged as an opportunity was a travel experience that I personally had, and of course, being in the consulting side and hearing and knowing a lot of travel agency problems, kind of married the two into creating what Mystifly was at that particular point in time. So the early stage of Mystifly was about, to answer your question about the business model, we've evolved over a period of time, though the core purpose and what we are as a company hasn't really changed much, but then the model and execution has actually evolved with time, adapting to the changing needs around us and adapting to the technology changes around us to a great extent. So initially, we were more about creating a platform that consolidated air travel globally into one single platform. So from there, we've come to a stage where today we are a retailing, shopping, aggregation, consolidation, and a payments platform. And as a marketplace, we've got the global airlines, wholesalers, consolidators on one side, and we've got the OTAs, large travel management companies, new age intermediaries or retailers who are not necessarily traditional travel businesses, but who have an aspiration to sell travel. They becoming the customers on the other side. So as a marketplace, we bring the best of fragmented supply and offer that fragmented supply in a way to a customer base, predominantly the B2B agency base online. 96% of our business happens with our API platform, about 4% through the booking interface.
Right. So globally, where all you reach? What are the markets you reach out to?
So if we were to split our business, about 50% of our business happens in the APAC belt, which includes India, China, Southeast Asia, Australia. They are key APAC markets. India, of course, is growing for us. So is some of the Southeast Asian countries and China. On the Western side, about 35% of our business happens in the European markets, and about 15% odd happens out of North America. So generally, the split is between 15 to 20% in North America, 30-35% in Europe, and about 50% of our business currently happens in APAC.
So I'm still on to the first question. What do you see post-COVID, especially China? You mentioned China, you mentioned US, and we know what's happening to US. What do you have to say there?
So traditionally, I think before I answer the question around COVID, I think traditionally what's happened as far as the air travel industry has been is that fundamentally the industry has been resting on three pillars, and these three pillars possibly are the distribution pillar, the fulfillment pillar, and the payments pillar. And that's something that I talk about quite often in my conversations. And these pillars were actually pre-internet relevant. They were relevant for the pre-internet world, where an airline found it difficult to discover a consumer, and a consumer found it difficult to kind of discover an airline or a supplier for that matter. With the internet revolution, I think while every other industry got on to making changes in the structure, I think travel, and particularly air travel, was one of the slowest and possibly not the one that ever understood or took that opportunity in the right perspective and innovated to create a different model in the process. Right. So what's happened is the opportunity that was left out as far as internet revolution is concerned, I think in a way is happening with the COVID pandemic impact. And I feel as a business, what we are doing is to kind of bring all these three pillars into one single platform, so that inefficiencies that each of these pillars working in silos had created in the past, be it on the distribution side, be it on the fulfillment side, or on the payment side, eliminating those inefficiencies in silos and bringing them together. That has been the tweak or change. And this tweak or change is not something that possibly has resulted on account of COVID. I think this is something that we've been very vocal about in our conversations. But I think the COVID situation has ended up giving an opportunity to kind of preempt or move that process a little forward. And those are the tweak and models that we are as a business at this point in time pivoting or creating.
Right. So although you've been in, or you are predominantly the B2B business
100%,
of distribution,
100%.
One of the thoughts which always go to my mind is that our customer-facing platforms have to be doing a lot beyond the inventory and book and price, which the B2B suppliers or GDS or consolidators or aggregators like yourself, they have to refine the search, they have to refine various parameters, bring the experiential side of it, building the data management and algorithms so that the consumer really feels, he's well endowed to maybe, and now post-COVID, those parameters, I'll come back to post-COVID, but I see those parameters also changing because there may be many functions which come in as health and regulatory, be it at the airports, be it within the airline, which I would like to be sitting at home and doing it before I land up at the airport. And we'll go into that part. But it's the second part of the question is that what are you doing at the back end, which is really helping the front end guys to evolve less, spend less, in their technologies to develop, because the B2C guys have to spend a lot of money from a simple API which you provide across. Yeah. And that's how in many ways an NDC was born, because the APIs wasn't giving everything which you wanted. So they wanted ancillary service. That's the part I have really. Is how will you add value to the B2C part?
Yeah, I think a very relevant question. As a B2B business, if we were to be just a booking platform like every other, and being a single product company, I think if you look around, every single B2B business in the travel space offer a bouquet of services beyond just flight booking, right?
Right.
Nobody survives on a single product business, and air in particular, because that's a business where everybody sees that there is no money or an opportunity. And I think we take pride in the fact that we are possibly the only company in the world that survives on just selling flights. And we have grown and we continue to grow just selling one single product as an offering, though being a B2B business, without getting lost in the core problem that we are trying to solve of driving efficiency in the whole flight experience and taking the stress out of a traveler in the process. So the whole flight booking experience today for a traveler is a very stressful process. I mean, I don't know whether you agree or disagree on this, but the reality is when you buy any product for that matter, you go to Amazon, you want to buy the most expensive, product that you can find. I don't think you need 100% concentration to do that particular job to buy, right? But when it comes to buying a flight, you have to have undivided attention, right? Without even losing a bit of your concentration, because one error, one mistake, and the whole process is gone, right? The whole experience of correcting that is such a nightmare when it comes to flights. But any other product in the world, you possibly buy, few clicks, you can amend, few clicks, you can correct. It's not as stressful as what it is buying possibly an air ticket.
Absolutely, I agree. And here I go to what Karthik was getting gung-ho about 100 crores worth of sale haven't happened. I would not like to see standing outside the airport, somebody making sure I'm corona-free. I get to the airport and I do certain things inside the airport. I do certain things which, till I'm able to board the flight. Forget about boarding the flight. So look at the airlines, right? They are anyway so stressed out in financial terms.
Yeah.
Right? They have to do all these security features. Airports are stressed out in the security features. I like to see certain processes of what is happening inside the airport and inside the aircraft shift to the booking end. And if I'm going on to a booking platform of a B2C, I like to see many of these features come out in a simple API form where I can do the checks and regulations. And so whose responsibility will it be ultimately? Will it be the GDSs? Will it be the B2B aggregators? Or will it be the B2C guys who spend money in the front to make all this happen? Or the passengers would still have to line up inside the airport for hours and hours? Because this is something which is a reality. It's going to happen for quite a while. So how do you see that evolve?
No, I think it's not a single responsibility of a particular entity. It's a collective responsibility. And that's where the whole concept of a connected trip. A trip does not really exist in silo. It goes through those different phases of journey, going all the way to check if it's not travel and so on. Unfortunately, like I said, in the flight space itself, just the flight booking process itself has been in silo for the last so many years. And we're talking about bringing silos which are independent today, where stakeholders, there are too many stakeholders or different stakeholders coming together and working in cohesion to create a great consumer experience or a great traveler experience for that particular matter. I think there is work that's going on, and particularly IATA, being part of a IATA committee, I see a lot of work and thinking that we're doing as part of the think tank in creating that particular journey for a traveler sometime in the future, where that entire stress can be taken out by bringing in different stakeholders as far as travel is concerned. But do we see that happening, in a certain immediate time frame? Possibly not. But is there an opportunity considering the kind of crisis that we are in? Definitely yes, because I think crisis like this, in a way, gives an opportunity to kind of rewrite rules which otherwise was considered to be the norm. And for sure, somebody has to take up that responsibility. And I feel in the airline space or in the travel space, someone who's got the credibility to own that up and work with different government bodies and so on, and the airlines and the agency network and so on, is definitely IATA. And I feel that there is work that's possibly going to happen or is happening in that direction.
Right. So if you mention IATA, they haven't been pretty successful with NDC. It's been lingering on for years. And do you see a future in NDC, one order position?
Yes, I think the whole NDC narrative or rhetoric in some form got rewritten in the last many years. I mean, NDC, like you rightly said in the early part of the conversation, was about creating that personalization as far as the traveler is concerned. It was about creating a great retailing opportunity or a platform for an airline to kind of differentiate their service over their competitor, create products on the fly that met the needs of a traveler for that particular matter. Or in a situation like what we have today, a pandemic where an airline would want to, on the flight side, let's have the middle row empty for that matter, or create a new seating pattern within the aircraft, enabling that with ease, right, and allowing retailing to happen is what the whole thought process was at the early stages of how NDC got envisaged and created. But unfortunately, I think what has happened over the last few years is that whole narrative got twisted, and the initiative became more about equating fare families and branded fares, buying experience between what was available on the airline.com website versus, on the indirect channel. So it just became a conflict between what the direct was doing, right? It became a conflict between distribution and not having to kind of incur that distribution. So I think that whole process was hijacked, and I don't necessarily think it was just about the way IATA did it, but I think multiple stakeholders who had vested interests, who had interest to delay the whole process, everybody acted in different directions to kind of derail this whole process because many were not ready, to adapt or adopt this change, right? But this is the time. I mean, I think if there is a better opportunity for the IATA and for the airlines to embrace NDC and create that retailing revolution. I mean, if you just go back, 10 years back, 12 years back, 2008 crisis, 2000 dot-com bust, each of those crises in a way created new opportunities in way travel was actually sold, right? Be it in the early days, the emergence of low-cost carriers or ultra-low-cost carriers. Low-cost carriers did exist, like NDC exists for some, in some form. LCC did exist even pre-2008, 2001 crisis. But those crises created an opportunity for some of these airlines to emerge out and create a value proposition that connected well with the traveler. And I think I personally feel that for sure NDC is at that particular point here at scale where the transformation and the journey from here on will be very different from what it was possibly in the past.
Yeah, because I don't know how many three-letter IATA code airports there are in the world. I mean, you might have an idea. I don't know how many two-letter code airlines are there in the world. So it's a huge task to put all of them into one common language and be able to then put them into one, API, if I may say, or a booking platform. It's a huge ask. Yeah.
I think NDC, it was not really the API. I think, like I said, there was, different directions in which the whole initiative got pulled, right? So NDC was supposed to be a standard, right? When you say a standard, it's like the travel adapter that we carry,
right.
That when you travel to US, or UK, wherever you travel, you carry a standard adapter, and that adapter fits into the socket in each of these countries, right? So NDC was supposed to be a standard structure of that kind, that irrespective of whatever airline, whoever is the airline, comes into the framework, one integration that intermediary who's wanting to sell actually has completed. Technically, the integration or that standard has to work. But because each airline who participated in the early stages had different objectives, they had different problem statements, they had different market challenges and so on, everybody tried out different kinds of POCs to kind of prove what that retailing and merchandising actually would mean. And eventually what happened was different versions of it got created, and there was no real standard. It was only with NDC Pattern 17.2 version that literally for the first time, a standard actually emerged in the NDC world. I'm sure, I mean, every initiative takes time, especially when there are committees involved and, multiple stakeholders who each having larger stake and power in terms of the equations have. And different interests had to be taken into consideration, and possibly we're at that cusp, as I believe that when things turn around from here, there will be a change in the way distribution happens. And it's not about, an opportunity for new players or new emerging players in this market. I mean, it's also about the way GDSs themselves have adopted. I mean, be it Amadeus or be it Sabre, I mean, their own journeys in the NDC world is fabulous for that. So things will change, and I guess it's changing.
Yeah. Talking about the change, I think when we had that discussion offline, I said I'm pretty much excited about what the Prime Minister said about local going global. And obviously, I've been excited about it for a long time. And I've been challenging myself to say, why the hell can't Indian travel companies become, at least market-wise, global? Yeah, instead of them coming to India and vice versa kind of situation. And I think the discussion we had, I said, your model, Rajeev, is actually a truly global model. But then I found out, obviously for your own reasons, you actually operate out of Singapore in terms of your banking, etc. And you said it in clear terms that, Ashish, if the banking in Singapore was replicated in India, I have no objection to actually making it as a global base out of India. So do you see that happening ever? What do you want for that?
Yeah, I mean,
and I hope somebody is listening it to make it happen.
Yeah. So, and our currency, of course, is not regulated very heavily, but it is still regulated. So any foreign exchange coming out of the country is regulated by the government and goes through a lot of checks and balances for right reason. But for a business like ours, efficiency in driving payments is a very important piece of how we saw the future. I mean, today, can you believe it that even today, for an airline, selling through the traditional model, it takes anywhere between 21 days to 30 days for them to get money into their bank account on average, when you as a traveler have actually paid, through the intermediary already.
So, sit on that money, BSP?
Yeah, it's a combination of BSP, predominantly the BSP on an average across different markets, and then the fluctuation or the exposure to rate of exchange that comes into different markets and so on. The risk cash as a payment model brings about, from a security standpoint for IATA and BSP, and all of those parameters brings in an element of time in getting that settlement done from an airline perspective. An alternative is to pay by card. So you settle the transaction by card, but then the card is a super expensive product. I mean, airline accepting card means that already a low margin product or low margin sale that they are possibly doing, they have money to lose in the form of card charges.
That's how to do the pass through, I think.
Correct. Yeah, even on a pass through, there's a merchant fee, but then of course they could be slightly reduced. But then what happens is travel in general across the globe is considered to be a very high risk category. It's equated to one of the most highest risk in terms of, because of the chargeback risk, the risk on suppliers, continuity and so on. It's a very high risk category item. So traditionally what happens is the more card transactions you do, the acquirers end up holding a good portion of that money back to them to protect against the risk and so on, right? So for us, as we extend our business and drive that efficiency across the three silos that exist, agility to kind of make payments at the speed at which we would want, but very a lot lesser complexities and I wouldn't want to say regulation, but ease, I think, was very important, and which is one of the reasons why we took that decision a few years back to kind of move. So cost of banking is a lot more expensive than possibly doing in India, but then the ease of operations is a lot more easier there, right? So if we were to relook at some of the structure coming back, then it's not just the fact that getting benefits in the taxation norms and so on, but it's also about how easily we can remit money out without getting into the complexities of the process. And today that's a very cumbersome process as far as India is concerned. So if somebody is listening to this, if there is a way, there is a channel that could be created to enable this, nothing like it from
Rajeev, I think somebody should listen, because I think it's a huge opportunity for India for enhancing their taxation base, because where structural changes were made to the airline in terms of, I mean, the first time I discovered that only 60% of the airspace is being utilized by the airline, and you could actually fly to Delhi and Mumbai in half an hour less. When that happens is another matter, but that's a huge reform which took place. And if that has to happen, certainly I would want somebody to relook at the banking reform. The regulatory part, I think India has been very good at putting regulations and checks and balances. I'm sure those will follow. Ultimately, the country, the local will become global if that was to happen. The second thing I see is I see, and I'm sure you see, that the airlines being starved for cash, right? I can't expect BSP would be sitting on payments for 21 days pipeline. They are going to get squeezed, push, push, push. Whether they actually collapse and airlines devise their own methods of collecting money, I don't know whether the cost of collecting money is more than having BSP around. But it's like the World Health Organization is under pressure of COVID. I see BSP getting into a pressure for sure. One last reaction before you go on to audience question with Karthik. Is BSP here to stay?
So I think I would say BSP, in the way the structure operates, definitely will go through changes and will have to go through changes to enable ease of payments. And I think it's not about from the holding of payment alone. BSP also has challenges in many countries where currency is regulated to kind of repatriate funds. Countries like now Sri Lanka a couple of months back announced complete blocking of any outward remittance out from their country. And we've seen that happening in Philippines. We've seen that happening in multiple countries. So there, I think the risk from an airline standpoint is money repatriating out into their headquarters and so on becomes a larger challenge. So to find ways to move out of this in a more efficient manner, reducing the risk of agency bankruptcy and protecting the airline interests and so on, there definitely needs to be a rethink. We are putting up ideas, and we are showcasing some of these conversations in our opportunities that we have when we have conversations with IATA in itself.
Right.
But I think I said, these are processes that's been running for many years and for decades, in a way that things have, there's a very well-oiled machinery. It's like when NDC was being spoken about, one of the biggest detractors were also the TMCs, right? The TMCs, just for them, everything was driven around the processes that they're created on GDSs. So when new content has to come in, which is outside, it meant a relook, rechange as far as the way they conducted business. So even when they had such a big reluctance to bring about a change, and BSP being a non-profit business acting in the interest of airline security and so on, when I say security from a payment security standpoint, for them to bring about a massive change overnight, I think I do have my doubts, but it'll happen. I mean, it has to. I think change is inevitable at the end of the day.
Well, lastly, it's not a question, it's a statement. I had a guest few days ago on the show who says, travel agents defaults for 1 lakh of rupees, the world comes to know as a defaulter. Here, airlines default and gobble up agency money. Nobody protects them. I can see your wholehearted laugh and what it means. Yeah, want to say one last word on that?
Yeah, I think I think unfortunately, travel agents are possibly the only traders in the world who have no guarantee on what they're selling from a price standpoint. Now, everybody else who sells a product, right. They can be sure that if I'm selling a price, that's actually a right price at which we are possibly selling, right? I think travel agents possibly is the only set of trading or what you call trading that possibly happens, that there is no way an agent can be sure that the price that you're selling at is possibly the right price. So when you're already so vulnerable at one end, selling a product and holding on to a product that brings your livelihood, and you have no say in which how that price point can be defined, right, with authority. I think it's only it's a pity in a way that there is no way an agency can or a network of agency can actually control the supplier, because from a supplier standpoint, the airline might in many of the markets, especially in the local market, is so high that if you have a certain reluctance, there is always an alternative option that's available, right? So for it's like there is too much of supply from a intermediary standpoint, and there's just about 5-6 airlines, and they have the might to kind of pick and choose and define who they want to work with versus the agency on the other side. So until the agency is able to create some differentiated value from an airline standpoint, I think we'll always be at the receiving end, and agents, like you rightly said, a lack in default will be spoken about, for the rest of the life. But an agency bankruptcy will or a non-payment will never be spoken about, because there's always an easy way to hide that.
Right. So that was a very stimulating discussion, Rajeev. And let's look at the audience questions, Karthik. Over to you, Karthik.
Ashish. And thanks, Rajeev. I mean, personally for me, it was a great opportunity to learn more about your business. And one thing which was the biggest takeaway for me personally was the way you explained how booking any other transaction like you do on Amazon is so easy to add to cart, edit, amend, and reopen that transaction. But travel, in a way, you almost feel like you are committing a big transaction, and you almost feel so invested in it, versus you might buy something worth of lakhs of rupees on Amazon, but you don't feel that experience. So I think that's really amazing to
forget lakhs. Even a 3,000 rupees worth of a domestic air ticket,
yeah,
I think
exactly.
is an installment process when you're buying an air ticket versus buying something, let's say, worth 10,000 on Amazon, right? That's
Exactly. Or any clothes, any other form of shopping, but that transaction is very stressful. You are absolutely bang on. And my question to you is that are you working with? I know you operate as a B2B organization, but do you work with innovative startups who want to expose that sort of a front end experience to the consumer, where they can actually feel that the whole booking, amendment, and post booking experience is very similar to a standard e-commerce transaction?
Yeah. So to answer that question, we have a product proposition called C2, which we launched in November last year.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole process on C2 is to kind of create that consumer internet experience in the changes and cancellation space. So
Right.
exactly how you make a change on any product online in the internet world. You could do a change. So we have had a coverage of about 200 airlines to start with under this model, and it's very independent and agnostic of the airline capability at the back end. So, so with C2, any agency, not necessarily a traditional travel business, but somebody who, one of the reasons why you see specific skilled businesses selling travel is because there's a lot of nuances in selling travel, particularly here. There's a process complexity, and all of that means that you need to have a lot of specific skills to sell air travel. And our attempt has been to kind of remove those nuances and create a normalized, orchestrated platform at the back end that is easy to consume, easy to use, standardized from an API standpoint, both for the pre-booking and for the post-booking process. So we do have a platform now in the form of C2, which is connected to, of course, our selling API, which is ASR. As long as the travel is consummated through ASR, we have the ability to offer change and cancellation internet e-commerce experience through an API call and complete the transaction. So we do have businesses who work with us, have integrated the workflows, and delivering that differentiated, advantage to their travelers in the process.
Right. And just the last question, and related to this, So somebody is asking that what advice do you have for people who are now, it's a bold move to do at this stage, but people who are still aspiring to venture into the travel industry and create a OTA or some sort of a travel experience platform. So you mentioned about using, for example, your APIs and your platform to create a differentiated offering. But what advice would you give to a 22-year-old who's trying to do something in the space of travel tech at this juncture, and he or she sees the opportunity that the reset button has been pressed, and now is a good time to build a scalable, sustainable model? So would you give any advice for somebody who's starting from scratch now?
No, absolutely. I think what this crisis, I mean, and I think at this particular time, right, the crisis has flattened everybody. Now, everybody almost really starts at a very similar kind of a level, right?
Right.
There's nothing like, of course, the existing incumbents do have the advantage of technology, learnings, and all of that, no doubt. But I think there is definitely an opportunity to recreate consumer experience in the way travel is being bought, sold, or consummated by individuals. And I think there has not been much that has happened in the air retailing space. Like I said, and NDC in a way also creates that opportunity. And how I would possibly describe this is, even today, I mean, 10 years back, if you look at, or 15, 20 years back, how you bought travel, air travel in particular, was looking at the price, right? And you continue to do that even. So the innovation and opportunity is to go beyond price to see how value can be driven and created by a new business that that is able to put the customer at the center of the focus rather than the seat, or buying a seat versus, maybe in a way I would put I would put it this way, maybe between active distribution versus a passive distribution. I think we've seen passive distribution in the last many years. I think there is a reason to kind of move to a more active distribution where the traveler is at the center of the whole process, and what can you do and what can we offer to a traveler and meet his needs and demands.
Right. Fair enough. With this, we're almost out of time. Ashish, do you have any closing remarks?
No, Rajeev, I see a nice, lovely breeze outside on the trees. I see from your
yeah,
balcony.
I was also seeing that.
Yeah, and from a 46-degree Delhi, enjoy the rest of the evening.
I think you should see more of it. I think we're going to see some rain this evening.
Yeah, last evening or same time, we couldn't keep our doors open because we were warned of huge locusts coming into Delhi, which thankfully they flew elsewhere. So yeah, that's Delhi for you. Thank you, Rajeev, for coming in. And I do hope
to all of the audience who have taken their time out to hear us. Appreciate, and thanks so much for giving me an opportunity, Ashish and Karthik. It was fantastic having this conversation and sharing some thoughts.
Rajeev, I hope to be interacting more with you. Good luck.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Rajeev. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you next Tuesday for our next session. Till then, stay safe, stay at home. Take care.
Bye-bye.